Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from. And thank you so much for joining us for this session called Win the Digital Transformation Game with the Product Mindset, presented by Product Management Today and sponsored by 3Pillar Global. I'm Brittany, the site manager of Product Management Today, and I'm really excited to be bringing you this session with hard-earned insight on developing successful digital initiatives. I've been really looking forward to talking with our guest, David DeWolf, today, in what I'm confident will be an interesting and amusing conversation. And don't worry, we'll be recording this session in case you have to leave early. Before we go any further, I want to thank 3Pillar Global for sponsoring this webinar and helping us to make this happen. If you haven't heard of 3Pillar, they're an innovative product development partner whose solutions drive rapid revenue, market share, and customer growth. Leveraging a lean and agile approach, 3Pillar delivers value-generating digital solutions with specialized product strategy and management, UX design, as well as software and data engineering expertise across mobile, cloud, and disruptive technologies. Thanks again, 3Pillar. On that note, please feel free to ask questions during today's session. You can do so by submitting them into the questions panel on the right side of your screen. We'll be answering them throughout and at the end of the presentation, so please send us any questions that pop into your mind while David presents. We're also going to pose some interactive questions throughout the session. For some, we're going to be asking you to raise your hand. You can do so by clicking on the button on the GoToWebinar control panel that looks like a hand with an arrow going into the palm. My lovely colleague Maria will be fielding your questions today. She will be happy to answer any questions you might have, so pull up the questions panel right now and say hello to let her know that you're listening to us. Lastly, if you have any audio issues during today's presentation, you may wish to dial in by phone. You can do so by selecting the More button in the upper right portion of your screen, and then select the Switch to Phone option. So today, I'm talking with David DeWolf, who is the founder and CEO of 3Pillar Global. Since accidentally founding 3Pillar in 2006, he has guided the company to a leadership position within the product development services sector. After a little more than a decade in business, 3Pillar and David have racked up dozens of awards, including Smart CEOs Magazine's Fortune 500, Washington, D.C.'s 40 Under 40, and Virginia's Fantastic 50. David is also the co-author of The Product Mindset, a book that breaks down how to succeed in the digital economy by changing the way that your organization thinks. And today, he's here to share with us how we can all develop a product mindset in our organizations. So without any further ado, please take it away, David.
Brittany, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't think in the last 5 years I've met a single executive that would disagree with the fact that in order to compete in today's digital economy, we actually have to embrace digital, right? We all know that something has fundamentally changed in the way that we conduct business. In fact, I would guess that not a single person on this webinar would challenge that either. Our challenge as an industry isn't about whether or not we should embrace digital. It's more about how can we be successful. In fact, it turns out that the research makes it very, very clear that only 28% of digital transformations are successful. That's according to Forbes in a recent survey. Now, when I share these statistics, a lot of times I get the pushback, well, yeah, that's historical data. We're learning this digital economy is rapidly moving, and so we've learned a lot. We're getting better and better. Well, unfortunately, the data actually doesn't say that. It says the exact opposite. Can you believe that in a recent Deloitte survey, only 16% of executives actually believe that they had the capabilities, the skills, the talent, the experiences on their team to even be able to compete in the digital economy? Not win, not be wildly successful, but just to compete. And furthermore, they question their own leadership. Less than half of executives that are responsible for implementing digital strategies, for building digital products, for executing on these initiatives actually believe they have their own leadership skills. They have the ability to lead their organization through this digital change. It's pretty shocking. The data tells us that not only are we not being successful, but we don't have any confidence in our own ability to be successful in the future. So here's my first question. Brittany shared at the beginning how to raise your hand. If you think you're winning, will you raise your hand and give us a show of hands?
As a reminder to raise your hand, you just have to press the button in your GoToWebinar panel. that has a little hand and a palm going in it, symbolize raising your hand. It looks like some people seem to be voting in so far. So far, we're sitting only around just under 10% of the audience saying that they believe that they're winning.
About 10%, and I'm going to assume there are some few folks that are too shy to raise their hand and they really are winning, but this is pretty standard. The reality is the data says that only 25% of us are winning, and the other 3/4 are failing in their digital initiatives. So you're not alone if you're in that camp. The question is, though, if we're not winning, what does it take to win? And I would pose to you that there's 3 really simple questions that we can use to identify where it is that we're failing. Now, the first question that I'd really challenge you to ask yourself is, do you understand the game? Do you understand when we say digital that we have to really embrace this change? Do you understand what that means? I find that so often people don't. Here's the image that comes to mind when I think about the mentality that we're bringing to the table when we try to approach digital initiatives. Many of you probably know that it's Super Bowl week, right? We're coming up on the biggest football game in the year. Tom Brady is one of the best quarterbacks of all time. He is an amazing athlete. He knows how to win. And I want you to imagine him putting on his helmet, putting his chin strap on, getting his cleats on, and walking through the tunnel, coming out, and he's on a basketball court. Now, he may be an unbelievable athlete. He may know how to win, but does he have a chance to win that game? No, he doesn't. He's not going to win a basketball game if he's prepped and ready to go for the football career that he has spent his entire life preparing for. That's exactly what we are doing in this digital economy. We are bringing incredible talent, software engineers, user experience designers, technologists of all sorts. We're bringing them to the table, and we are trying to accomplish something totally different. We're playing a different game than we've ever played before. You see, in the old world, in what I call the IT game, the game used to be all about ourselves. We were building enterprise applications. We were automating things within our own ecosystems in order to drive efficiencies, to save pennies, in order to automate things. In the new game, we're playing a product game. And the product game is not about ourselves. It's not about building to serve our constituents within the 4 walls of our office. It's about serving our customers. And it's about not just serving our customers, but driving revenue growth from those customers, as opposed to saving pennies. Those are 2 wildly different games. And if you don't understand that those are different games, you're going to show up with great athletes, great performers, but trying to accomplish the wrong thing. So if you don't understand that, if you don't understand the game that you're playing, you fundamentally have pinpointed the reason why you are one of the 3 out of 4 that are failing. The second question that is really simple to ask, but we need to understand, and we should really challenge ourselves with, is if we're playing a different game, do your people understand the rules? You see, in this world where it's no longer about ourselves, context really matters. And we have to understand the rules of the game, which means we have to understand our customers in a way we never have before. Let me tell you a story. We were working with a team one time and really helping them to figure out why were they struggling with their software initiatives. They were building digital technology, but they simply couldn't figure out how to build the right thing. They couldn't figure out how to gain adoption. They couldn't figure out what was going on. Like I said, in the IT game, it was all about us. And so we knew the customer. In the product game, it's about the customer. And so in this example, the team we were working with was working to automate the warranty supply chain. They were working with large manufacturers of appliances. They were working with distributors of appliances, and they were automating what happens when a customer has a warranty problem. And one day, one of the engineers went to one of the product managers and was having a conversation. And in the midst of a conversation, looked puzzled at her and said, "What's a warranty?" How can we expect for our teams to be able to build successful product if our people don't understand our customers in a unique way. It is essential that your people, whether they are engineers, whether they're user experience, product managers, that they get out, that they understand the rules of the game, that they understand how the game is played, that they understand the market at a brand new level. Just like if you don't know what game you're playing, you're not going to win. If your people don't understand the rules of the game, you're also not going to win. But the reality is that's not enough in and of itself. You can understand the game, your people can understand the rules, but if you don't understand how to keep score, you're also going to fail. You remember Tom Brady? He's out on the basketball court. And there's another athlete. Does anybody remember Usain Bolt? Olympic sprinter, unbelievably fast in the 100 meters. He also doesn't know how to play the game of basketball. You know why? Because Usain Bolt, even though he's incredibly fast, and even though you have to run when you're playing basketball, and that characteristic translates. What's different about Usain Bolt is that he's an amazing sprinter, and sprinting is about one and done. It's about getting from point A to point B, and at the end, you're either the winner or the loser. But in basketball, your team has to go back and forth and continue to score, continue to put up points and outscore your opponent. You see, in the old IT game, it was a win or lose game. How many of you have within your offices right now software that was built 3, 5, 8, even 20 years ago that's still running within your organization? It may drive you crazy, but it still serves its purpose. It still automates something. It still helps get the job done. You're still driving ROI. Guess what? In the product game, in this new digital world, that simply does not work. You have to continually score. You have to compete over and over and over again and keep on putting wins on the board, just like in basketball. So the bottom line is you've got to, yes, understand the game you're playing. You've got to understand and make sure your teams understand the rules of the game, but you also have to make sure that you can do it over and over again. You've got to know how we keep score and how you ultimately win. Here's a great example of that. Pull your phone out for a minute and just look. How many times per day are your apps updating with updates? Do you know that there's been research done that shows that very explicitly the top 10 apps within the Apple iTunes store, those apps are updated 10 times more frequently than the top 100, which themselves are updated 3 times more frequently than the rest in the App Store. That's the world we live in. It is continually winning over and over and over again. So that's how you pinpoint where your failure is. That's how you know. Ask yourself the question, am I failing because I don't know the game? Am I failing because my team doesn't know the rules of the game? Or am I failing because I don't know how to keep score? I don't know how to keep this going over and over and over again. But knowing why we're failing isn't necessarily enough to know how to turn the tide and start winning. So understanding the game, understanding the rules, understanding how to keep score sets us up so we have the ability to win. Great, step one. But we've got to do so much more than that. And so you may ask the question, what's the secret? Well, we've identified 3 Ps, 3 different Ps that are part of a winning game plan in this digital economy. I want to share those with you right now. The first P is the problem. Remember when I was talking about the customer, how the game of digital is different from the IT game because we have to know the customers? Well, what's absolutely essential is that you know your customer so well that you can identify their real pain point, that you can identify what they truly need. Here's a story for you. Several years ago, we were working with a company that had unbelievable technology in the telematics space. Before we had self-driving cars and technology around the auto space as mature as it was right now, they had figured out how to take the sensors on a phone and through a phone figure out things such as who was driving in a car, whether you were a driver or a passenger, right? Different things like that. whether you were accelerating or decelerating. They had all sorts of technology and algorithms that could figure out the context of what was going on with the car. They were able to raise a lot of money because their technology and their algorithms were unbelievable. But you know what? Ultimately, this startup failed. Why did they fail? They failed because they never identified a problem. They were stuck on the solution. They were stuck on the technology itself. If we want to succeed in this digital economy, we have to figure out what is the problem. The problem identification is step one of our winning game plan. Once you have a problem, you also need a product. Now, I want you to hear me here. Product is fundamentally different from software. In this digital age, undoubtedly, it is a software product we're talking about. But just because we've built software doesn't mean it's a product. There's a fundamental difference, and that difference comes down to commercialization. You see, products have to self-fund. They are creating dollars, not saving pennies. They have to fund themselves. And so it's absolutely essential that you figure out how to take this problem you've identified and build a product out of it that consumers not only want, that only solves their pain, but they will pay for. It's absolutely essential. I can't tell you how many clients that we have talked to who actually have great ideas, and they're wonderful at listening to customers. They have great customer experience, but they can't figure out how to translate that into a business model. They can't figure out how to build something that is so valuable that the customer will actually pay for it. Now, there's lots of business models that have been built off of build it and they will come, gaining users, and I'll figure out how to monetize it later. That's fair, but you have to figure out how to monetize it at some point in time. Commercialization is what makes a product different from software. We have found at 3Pillar that there are two fundamental things that can help and provide a secret to identifying your product. The first one is being maniacal about your objective. You know, one of the differences with products than other types of software is that they solve a particular problem of commercialization. Typically, this objective is something like, I want to drive X amount of revenue growth or X revenue dollars. But a product can also be successful by capturing more market share or other things like that. You would be amazed at how many organizations we go into and they have absolutely no idea why they're building the product they're building. We find that focus on a single objective, typically a revenue goal, typically something like that, or market share, user adoption can drive wild success. The second thing is once you have that objective, make sure the entire team knows it and they are continually measuring their success. You see, in the product world, it's not about whether or not your software works. Remember, product is different from software. What matters is whether the product is driving the results. You need software that not only works, but solves a real problem and you can monetize, you can commercialize. So define your objective and continually measure it. That brings me to a question, and you can answer here in the comments if you'd like. What's your ultimate objective? You're working on a digital initiative right now. That digital initiative, what are you trying to accomplish? Can you articulate it in just a few words? Can you not only articulate what you're trying to do, something like we're trying to drive more revenue, but can you put a number to it? Does your team know that number? Are they measuring it maniacally? Every time you put a software release out, are you able to see whether it's helping you get closer and closer to that objective, or whether maybe you're slowing down in momentum? What is your ultimate objective? Do you know? If you don't, you may not be primed for success. You don't have a winning game plan. The third P of a winning game plan is process. Remember, we talked about it's not enough to just solve one problem. It's not enough to have a single product launch. In this digital economy, if you're not continually innovating, if you're not always evolving, you're actually losing the market share you've worked so hard to gain. We find that folks fail in typically one of two ways. First, they're not iterating at all. How many enterprises are used to their software builds being projects, their capital expenses? Their CFO wants to budget for it in a 6-month timeline. Here's your money, go get it done. And once it's done, it's done. That mindset fundamentally doesn't work in the digital economy. You have to change your thinking. It's about continually winning. It's about continually scoring more points over and over again. The second way folks fail is by not iterating fast enough. You have to have a process, a methodology, an approach that allows you to iterate over and over and over again. Remember that statistic I shared with you? On your iPhone, the apps that are the most successful are the ones that are being updated 10 times more frequently than the rest of those in the App Store. That's wild, but that's the reality of the digital economy we live in right now. Consumer expectations have totally changed. They expect continual progress. They expect new innovation. They expect the unexpected. Does your process allow you to excel at change? Does your process allow you to iterate and iterate fast? So, your winning game plan. First and foremost, the problem that we're solving. Do you understand it? Do you know your customer well enough? So well, in fact, that you can identify their pain, maybe even in ways that they don't know their pain. Number two, the product. Do you know how to take that problem, how to mix it with ideas and software and turn it into a product that you can commercialize? It's essential that we don't just build software, but we build software products that we can actually drive revenue, growth, and adoption off of. And then finally, it's process. Do you have a process that ensures that we can do it not once, not twice, not 3 times, but over and over and over and over again? So let me pause there and ask you another question. Think about it. And again, feel free to share your comments if you want to share them with us. What's your challenge? Is it a challenge of thinking? Is it a challenge of understanding? Understanding the game you're playing, the rules of the game, and how to keep score? Because if so, you're probably like most of the 75% that are failing in digital initiatives. Or are you struggling with an execution challenge? Is it about identifying the problem, the product, or having a great process? So once you've answered that question, you can start to identify, how do we get to work? What are we going to do to take a step forward? And a lot of times folks ask me, digital transformation is so big, it's so hard, I don't know how to get started. Well, I want to share with you 2 secrets of how you can get started and get started small. I really believe that anybody can make a drastic change within their organization simply by doing one of 2 things. First, understand that mindset matters. Understand that really knowing the game you're playing, really understanding the rules of that game, and understanding how to keep score in this digital economy can really shape the behavior and the execution of your team. If you have a mindset problem in your organization, if your organization doesn't get this different world, I'd urge you to begin to espouse that, to begin to teach your organization. That, quite frankly, is why we wrote the book, The Product Mindset, was because over and over again, organizations were asking us, hey, we can't believe how much more productive and impactful your teams are than ours, because they get something we don't get. Will you teach us? And frankly, most of the time, it was practitioners coming and saying, David, will you please teach our CFO, our CEO, our CMO? So we wrote this book as a simple way to change the mindset of organizations so that they could embrace the difference between software products and other type of software. So one way you can take this step, one way you can start to change the mindset of your organization is buy a book. Come get a book and share it with your team. You'd be amazed at how just simply changing your mindset can change the game. The second way that you can take a small step is if you have an execution challenge, if you're not identifying the problem, if you're not identifying the product, if you are not building off of a process that allows you to do it over and over again, start small. Don't feel like you have to boil the ocean. Find a single team, a single product, maybe just a module of a team that you can begin to not only be successful with and shape their mindset and execute with, but that they can start to rub off on teams around them. Use them as a model. One success leads to other successes. You know, in the game of sports, winning breeds more winning. Momentum is real. I have seen it over and over and over again in technology. The same thing holds true. If you start small, you can build on little successes. Start with a single team. And if you don't have a team that gets it and knows how to execute it on it, 3Pillar would love to help. That's exactly what we do is we build small innovation teams that are incredible at taking this product mindset and putting it into action. We can come in and not just build product for you, but teach the product teams around you in order to drive forward, in order to espouse this way of thinking and this way of doing. So I'd urge you, feel free to reach out, get in touch with us. You can see us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, or shoot us an email. We'd love to help. We'd either be happy to send you a book so that you can change your thinking and how you're approaching the digital economy, or we'd be happy to talk about standing up an example team that can come in and start to execute and not only help you get product to market, but teach you the methods, the process of doing this over and over and over again. So those are my thoughts on the digital economy. We'd love to open it up now for questions.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much, David. This has been a really great presentation so far. I know we have a bunch of questions coming in. So if there's anything that we covered that you have a question about, feel free to write it into the questions panel now, and we'll definitely bring it up. But before we dive into the questions, I just want to remind all of our eager attendees that the recording and slides for this webinar will be sent to you within 48 hours. And that email will also include a link to a free download of the Product Mindset audiobook, courtesy of David and 3Pillar. So be sure to keep your eyes peeled for that. We're also going to be sending out a brief feedback survey when you exit the webinar, so please help us to make our webinars better by telling us what you thought of today. All right, so with all that out of the way, let's dive into our audience questions. So we have a question from Chad who asks, are there specific differences between consumer and corporate expectations that you have seen?
Yeah, this is a really interesting dynamic that's going on in the digital world right now. You know, if you think about innovation, innovation used to happen from the top down. The largest organizations in the world. In fact, think about the internet itself, right? It came from the government. And then government went to research institutions, and then research institutions down to the largest corporations, and finally consumers got innovation. Today, it's happening inside out, and that's one of the reasons why innovation is happening faster and faster and faster. And so you have this dynamic where consumers are using technology and they are now driving the standard and the expectation, right? It started really with mobile devices where the mobile adoption happened sooner with consumers than with the corporate environment. And so now what we see is consumer products pushing the edge of user expectations and being the most innovative, and enterprises and corporations trying to keep up. But here's what's happening is that as more and more millennials get into the workforce, more and more folks that have grown up with this technology and have these consumer expectations, it is pushing the bar forward. And so we absolutely see that the expectation of corporate software, of products that are being sold in a B2B versus a B2C environment are absolutely required to keep up and hold that same bar. And so it's absolutely essential that even if you are building B2B software, you begin to really embrace this mindset of moving quickly and moving fast and keeping up with those expectations. That said, there is a fundamental difference in the way that those products are bought. One of the things that we talk about in the book is that products have to be chosen, right? One of the differences between software within an enterprise and software products that are actually sold is that the customer has to actually choose to not only use, but most often buy that product. Well, in a B2B product experience, you often have a different buyer from user. And so you have two different sets of needs that you need to identify and understand. And that's an important dynamic to really push into and understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for explaining that differentiation. And actually, to your point about UX and how that's evolving, we have another question from Esther who asks, if buyer and users are different, how would you navigate that?
So that's great. It's a great follow-on question. And the first thing is to understand, go back to the problem we were talking about, right? P number one, understand the problem. What's absolutely essential when we talk about getting to know the customer in a B2B situation, you have to get to know the whole customer, not just the buyer you're talking to or not just the end user. A big mistake that we see a lot of product organizations make is that they create personas for only one of the two of those. They may go in and understand the buyer and the buyer pattern, and so they're able to get through a buying cycle, but then that product is never used, and ultimately it is unchosen later on, right? The organization moves away. Or you see a lot of organizations go in and they know the use cases really well. They understand the user and what they need, but they don't understand that the dollars come somewhere else and somebody else is actually making the buying decision. And oftentimes you can see products be successful in grassroots efforts where they're adopted first, maybe by a technology organization, and then ultimately get sponsorship higher up in the organization. But that's a really hard play. And so our recommendation is that you go and you really get to know the customer, not as an individual, not as a role, but you get to know the customer in terms of their entire enterprise. Who is the buyer? Who are the influencers? Who are the customers? And understanding the pain points of the entire ecosystem. Because in a B2B setting, your customer is not a person. Your customer is an organization. It's a living, organic, breathing organization that has multiple constituents, and you have to understand all of them. And so the user experience, the product strategy has to be shaped for all of those constituents. And it's an essential understanding that a lot of organizations lack because they focus on the person as opposed to all of the people involved in the buying decision and the continual use of that product.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point. As a product manager, you hear a lot about user experience and user research, but it's also important to have an understanding of everybody that's involved in the buying process.
Yep.
So thank you for making that clear.
Sure.
We have a question from Stephen who asked, what are the approaches for products that have functions that are products in themselves?
That's a great question. There are a couple different approaches that can happen here. And this goes back oftentimes to, we talked about the product being element number two that helps drive success. Really understanding what your product definition is key. And when I talk about that, I mean, what kind of product? Are you building a unique niche product that is trying to solve a single pain point, or is it more of a comprehensive product that may have multiple modules, right? And so as you dive into the product, right, what's fundamentally different about product is this aspect I talked about, which is commercialization. Understanding how you can commercialize different functions and features in different packages for how they solve needs for the ultimate customer. And so by teasing that out and truly understanding not only the pain point, but the value that you're driving, you're able to start coming up with new pricing strategies and pricing models and new packages that enable you to sell the product in different ways that create different value. And so if your product is one that is trying to solve a comprehensive problem, maybe you have different modules within it. You may have upsell opportunities, or maybe you have a subscription service that you can actually carve off different types of subscriptions. There's all sorts of different ways to look at it, but I think it fundamentally goes back to this question of commercialization is, do you really understand your commercial strategy? Do you really understand how you're making money? And if so, you can start to use these really aha moments of identifying different functions and features that may have lives on their own to create new value and to drive more exponential growth. And this goes back to what I was talking about identifying your objective. If your goal is ultimately to grow revenue, for example, if I start to see that certain functions and features are so valuable that they may have a life on their own, you may carve that out and find a new way to drive growth from that, or to price differentially for it, or to add more features and more functions to that in order to make it even more valuable and to drive that revenue growth. You may take a totally different approach if your goal is market share. And so identifying that objective is really key, but it's a great point that absolutely today's software products are so complex that oftentimes it's a suite of products. It's not just a single product. And when it comes to commercial strategy, that really matters.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That's a fantastic answer. So we have another question from Devin, and this came up while you were talking about the third P, so process, and about being able to iterate on your product and your features. And Devin asked, if you see a competitor roll out a new feature component, how do you recommend a product leader respond to that? Should they roll out something similar to stay competitive, or try to work on a different feature?
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations?
Definitely. This here is a great question because there are two ways to compete. One way to compete is to be better than your competition. Another way to compete is to be different from your competition. And too often we see organizations choose to compete on being better instead of on being different. And they just try to keep up with the Joneses. Here's the challenge with that type of strategy. That's a game of commoditization. It's about, can I do it better? Can I do it faster? Can I do it cheaper? And if you're playing the catch-up game, you're not doing it faster. You're not the innovator. You're just trying to be a copycat. And often it's going to commoditize your product. Going with the different approach, if you differentiate, your competitors are doing something different. And so you're solving a unique set of challenges. If you know your customer so well that you can identify unique pain points or pain points that are unsolved, or you can specialize in one aspect, you have an opportunity to create a premium product. You have the opportunity to truly differentiate. And there is now a reason why organizations will choose you over another organization as opposed to just looking for cheap. That can be really big in terms of helping you reach your objectives and reach your goals. Now, don't get me wrong. When you make those hard choices, you are choosing what to focus on. We've all heard the cliche. Focus is what you say no to, not what you say yes to. And so you are saying no. You will lose for the same reasons that you win. But when you compete, you will win, and you will win big. And so I always challenge organizations to be intentional. It doesn't mean that you never come out with a feature because of competitor death. It means that you understand what type of product you're building. Are you building a product that is all about differentiating from your competition, or are you really trying to compete head to head and you need to keep up with the Joneses? In both situations, you can build a feature because a competitor did, but it has to be aligned to that strategy, and you have to tie it back to what you're building in the first place.
Definitely. Thank you. I think the point about intention is really important and can get overlooked when, in a competitive market where everybody's rushing to put something out first. You can forget about the intention and purpose behind your product. Definitely. So we have another question from Kate, who asks, as a product leader, you work with cross-functional teams, but don't necessarily lead them. So she's asking if you have any recommendations for aligning all of these teams on the rules of the product game instead of just your own product team. So how do you get everybody on the same page?
What an insightful question, because you hit the nail on the head, right? The product management role is the hub. It is the facilitator of the entire product game, and it is a really challenging role because of that, right? True leadership is leading through influence, not just through authority, right? It is a challenge undoubtedly. One of the things that I really stress, there's two things that I would encourage you to do. The first and foremost is what you've already done, which is acknowledging this, right? My job as a product manager is not to be the ultimate decision maker for X, Y, or Z. My job is to facilitate discussion, facilitate decisions by reaching out to marketing and finance and engineering and user experience and operations and every aspect of the organization. And oh, by the way, most especially the customer, and to combine all of that to put the great heads together to make great product roadmap decisions. And yes, there are times where you will make those decisions, but really acknowledging that you are a facilitator is really key. And what happens when you do that is you begin to ask great questions. In my experience, incredible product managers are very curious. They have the ability to really ask good questions. They have the ability to tease out from people the insights that they have that they may not even know that they have. And so become exceptional at asking questions and lead by asking questions. Lead by putting things on the table. And that can be a really strong tool for leading through influence.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I think that's a really great response. So we have a clarifying question from Andres, who asks, when you're talking about repetitiveness in the process, are we talking about repeating the process of understanding the problem quickly or replicating the initial process quickly?
Good question. It's really at the meta level. This is about over and over and over and over again, right? It is every step along the way in the digital game has to be iterative. It's all about making sure that we understand, we hypothesize, we experiment, we build, we learn, and we do it over and over and over again. And so I think to your point about the question, it is understanding the problem quickly, absolutely, but responding to that quickly, experimenting quickly, putting prototypes and products and MVPs out in the market and continually iterating on them, but being able to do that not just at the micro level, right? A lot of us do it. We've embraced agile techniques, right? We've embraced lean management. You've got to do that at the micro level and the macro level. Over and over again. And it's not just, if you think about it, yes, at a software release level, at a sprint and iteration level, it's also at the macro level of releasing new products as well and increasing your product suite over time. And so I think that this idea of having processes within the organization, right, there's a lot of, we all know, we've been talking about agile for 20 years now, right? It's not just those specific things. It's actually at a meta level, just realizing that we now live in a world that requires everything we do to be iterative in order to be changing the game continually.
Yeah, absolutely. But before a product leader can get to that process where they're able to iterate so quickly and repeat these processes, they have to get started in switching to this mindset that you're describing. And Jeff asks, how do you start small? What do you recommend a product leader or software leader do tomorrow to begin leading their path down this, leading their team down this path of the product mindset?
Yeah, you just said something key, which is changing the mindset. And one of the keys there is just embracing the reality that when you have a product mindset, you realize that these digital products are never done. I mean, just let that sink in. We're never done. And we used to, in the IT game, it used to be all about projects, right? And projects are done. We can complete it. We can get finished. And one of the things that we see a lot of organizations struggle with is this concept that what do you mean I can't check the box? What do you mean it's not done? No. We're always going to be evolving. And so I think the mindset that starts at the root of this, and it can be both a personal mindset, but also a corporate mindset, is one that embraces this reality that finished is not a word, right? Like at the point in time where we say this product is done, we really mean it's done, right? When we pull it, when we stop iterating on it, it is going to die. And that means we are end of lifing the product. Now, don't get me wrong, there's times when you should end of life a product, but so long as you want the product to be successful, you have to embrace this reality. And until you get that through your mind, it becomes very difficult to get started because we see so many organizations get paralyzed by the idea of trying to figure out the endpoint. And so here's a couple ways I see it play out. CFOs are a great example. They want to budget in capital expenses. Tell me what the total cost of that project is going to be. No. In this digital world, it's operational spend. I need you to bank on R&D happening forever. And so don't budget a project, budget it just like you do my sales team, right? The sales team has to continue to sell, right? My operations team is gonna be there. I need an R&D team. I need a product team that continues to iterate on my product, right? There's one example, right? And so beginning the conversations by thinking small really starts with embracing that no matter how hard I try, I can't get done. And so I shouldn't be daunted by getting started. The best way to get started is to do something small, and iterate on it very, very quickly, because there's no other way in the digital world.
Yeah, definitely. To repeat another cliche here, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step.
Absolutely. There's lots of cliches that that go with the digital economy, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, it looks like we have time for a couple more questions. So we have a question from Sarah, who asks, what's the hardest part of taking a transformation job?
Oh, the hardest part of a transformation job. I think there's two things. The first one, which is probably the right answer, is culture change. Digital transformation, we use the word mindset. If you read the book, we've had a lot of people come back and say, man, what you're really talking about is culture. And there's no doubt about that, right? Mindset drives culture. In fact, we dedicated an entire chapter to talking about culture and building culture, because it's so essential. And changing culture is hard, right? Culture is about the behaviors of an organization and what happens naturally, what are the default behaviors. And so we're changing that. And in order to truly digitally transform an organization, you have to move the culture from where it is to where it needs to be in order to be successful in this world. And we all just know that's hard. Change management as a whole is hard, never mind when it's being applied to human beings and the way they think and act and behave and the habits that are ingrained within an organization. So I think culture, I will say the other side of it is what we started this conversation with, which is the reality that digital transformations fail. And so another big thing that I see is fear. A lot of executives that are asked to lead digital transformation are paralyzed right now, because they really don't know where to start. They understand that culture change is hard, and they are just paralyzed. And my solution to that is really identifying the problem. It's why I started with making sure we understand the game. I am shocked at how many digital leaders are out there having just been named to lead a digital initiative, or maybe they're in the midst of it and they're talking to me about their fears and these big things that they're accomplishing. And I say, well, just stop for a minute and define for me, what is success? What is this digital transformation? In fact, just start there. Give me a definition of digital transformation, and they have no idea how to tell me how this digital world is different from the IT world that they grew up in, or how this digital world is, oftentimes they come from a business background, which is great too. You don't have to be a technologist to lead in this digital world. But they can't define what's different. They can't say, well, here's what's different. Here's what's fundamentally different about the digital world. In this digital world, we are buying and selling. The products and services we're buying and selling are virtual. They are the bits and the bytes are the product, right? Before, we used technology to serve our businesses, to automate it, to make it more efficient. But now it is the product itself. The digital is the good or service of this economy. If you can't define that, if you don't know that, and if you can't explain how that makes your world different, there is no way you will be successful. And to me, that's how you get over that fear. And so stop, pause, and make sure that you have a handle around how this is different. That'll help you get over that fear.
Yeah, definitely. And would you recommend talking with your team as well? Because I think a lot of times people have different understandings of what digital transformation is and what it would entail. So a leader's perspective might vary greatly between the different members of their teams.
Well, getting your team on the same page is what culture and mindset is all about. The reality that we talked about the difference between the IT world and the product world. In the product world, you have to know your customer, and you are discovering what your customer needs. You are not defining requirements. Listen to those two things. It's nuanced, but it's really important, right? In the IT world, we knew what we were building because we were building it for ourselves, and we were defining requirements. In the product world, we are discovering what our customers want and need. And that discovery takes place not by one person, but by the entire organization. And because you don't know what you're building up front, you are discovering it along the way. You're making a lot more judgment calls. And everybody within your organization has to make those judgment calls. The quality assurance engineer, the user experience designer, the product manager, the engineer, all of them are making judgment calls. And if you don't frame the problem for them, if you don't share with them what the digital economy means, what the software we're building is, if you don't share with them who the customer is, what the market is, if they don't know the customer intimately, if they don't have context, they can't make the best judgment calls. And so it's your job as a leader to make sure that the entire organization, everybody involved in product development, I don't care if they're engineers, product managers, user experience, or marketing or finance, they all need to understand these things. And that's, again, why we wrote the book. So the entire organization can get on the same page and be using the same language to talk about these things and make those judgment calls. Because once your team is empowered to make those judgment calls, then they can make more, not only better decisions, but they can make decisions more quickly and they can iterate faster, which is absolutely required.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for explaining all of that. All right, we have our final question here, and it's kind of a big one, but how do you know if your digital transformation is working?
That's a hard one, you're right. So especially when you're talking about enterprise digital transformation is all about cultural change. And so it's oftentimes not just one product, right? It's about the entire organization and embracing a new business model, okay? So because of that, there's two things I recommend. The first one goes back to when we were talking about the product. I shared that what is absolutely essential to driving successful commercial results from your software, which is what makes it a product, is having a very clear objective. We had a client we started working with several months ago that was really struggling with their software product. They were kind of a rocket ship, and they really slowed down and struggled to keep up with their growth demands. And as we went in, we started talking and interviewing folks, figuring out what was going on. We talked to literally 17 people in the organization at various levels, including the CEO of the organization, and sat them down and asked them, what is the objective that you guys are trying to hit? How do you know when you are successful? And nobody could even give us a guess, never mind be on different pages about what that objective was. Well, that's not a recipe for success. And so start small, like I shared, with a single product team, and define a very clear objective of what you're trying to really accomplish. Make it a very hard, tangible result. Put a very clear number on it. Make sure the entire team knows, and measure it maniacally over and over and over again, and figure out if the judgment calls and the decisions that your team are making are getting you closer and closer to that goal or not. And if you're not, you're not winning the digital transformation game. But if you get there, I can guarantee you human beings are smart and they want to succeed. And they are innovative and they are intuitive and they will figure it out. And so I recommend that throughout your organization, you are just maniacal about having scoreboards, about measuring things, right? This is kind of business 101, but we forget it in the digital world because we think it's so much more complex. But you perform, you execute on what you measure. And so measure it, being maniacal, set that goal. And if you can do that across an organization and show it in one product, and then you can expand it to the product line, and then the product line goes to the enterprise, all of a sudden you build a culture that is measuring return on your product development initiatives. And that can be the best way to really measure your success across the entire enterprise on whether or not you are having the type of change in your culture that you're attempting to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, David. I think that is all that we have time for today. I hope everybody listening had half as much fun as I did. Thank you again to our guest, David, to our sponsor, 3Pillar Global, and to all of you for attending. I'm Brittany Shear. You can find Product Management Today on Twitter at ProdMGMT Today, or at the link at the bottom of the slide. You can find David at all of the contact information listed on the left side of the screen. I know that he and the 3Pillar team are happy to get in contact with anybody who has further questions or is interested in learning more about 3Pillar. So definitely do get into contact if you have anything more you'd like to ask. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thanks, Brittany. This was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good one.